The alarm went off at 5:14 a.m., 16 minutes before it was supposed to. Ethan Calloway silenced it before it could wake Lily, rolling out of bed in one practiced motion. The way a man learns to move when there is a small person sleeping on the other side of a thin wall. He stood in the kitchen, in the gray pre-dawn, measuring out coffee by instinct, staring at the window above the sink where the streetlights were still on. The apartment was small enough that he could hear his daughter breathe. He had learned to listen for the slight rasp, the extra half-second pause before exhale, the sounds that told him whether the night had been kind to her lungs. Tonight had been kind. He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. While the coffee brewed, he pulled open the refrigerator and took inventory. Half a carton of eggs, the end of a loaf of whole wheat bread, 2 apples, and a container of the low-sodium soup the nutritionist at Mercy General had recommended for Lily's inflammation management. 3 months ago, he could not have named a single food that affected inflammation. Now, he could recite a list. Necessity had made him a student of things he'd never imagined studying. He scrambled 2 eggs and made toast, cutting the toast into the triangles Lily preferred. He poured a small glass of orange juice and set it on the table at her spot. He packed her lunch, the peanut butter sandwich with the crusts cut off, the apple slices, the 2 small crackers she was allowed, and the folded note he wrote every morning without fail. Sometimes the notes were jokes. Sometimes they were drawings, crude ones, a stick figure dad and a stick figure girl standing in front of a stick figure house with a lopsided sun overhead. Today he wrote, "You are the reason I get out of bed. Love, Ba." He had picked up the Vietnamese word for father from a book he'd read aloud to her once, a children's book about a girl who traveled to many countries. Lily had laughed and tried to say it, and from that day forward, had sometimes used it when she was feeling soft and young. He kept it in the notes when he could. At 6:45, his phone rang. He already knew the number. "Mr. Calloway. This is billing at Mercy General. We're following up regarding the outstanding balance on account." "I know," he said quietly, moving away from Lily's door. "I haven't forgotten. I'm working on it. I need 2 more weeks." There was the practiced pause of someone reading from a script, measuring their compassion against their procedure. "I understand, sir. We can extend the grace period by 10 days, but after that the account will need to—" "10 days is fine. Thank you." He hung up and stood with his hand pressed flat against the kitchen counter, looking at the toast triangles on the small pink plate. Ethan Calloway was 34 years old. He had been the warehouse and logistics manager at Hale Corporation for 4 years, which was long enough to know every route, every vendor relationship, every quirk in the inventory system. He was the kind of employee who stayed late without being asked, and came in early without keeping score. His co-workers brought him coffee sometimes, just because. Sandra, from Accounts Payable, had given Lily a stuffed rabbit when she heard about the hospitalization. That was the kind of man Ethan was, the kind that other people noticed not because he demanded attention, but because the absence of him would leave a specific, person-shaped gap in a room. He did not think of himself as a good man in any self-congratulatory way. He simply had a daughter who needed him to be steady, so steady was what he had become. When Lily appeared in the doorway at 7, still in her pajamas with the small robots on them, her brown hair pressed sideways from the pillow, she looked at the plate and then at him. "You cut them the right way," she said, as if this required acknowledgement. "Always." She sat down and picked up a triangle. She was 7, with her mother's green eyes and Ethan's stubborn chin, and she was the most important thing in his world, by such an enormous margin that second place didn't register. "Is today a hard day at work?" she asked. He poured her juice without looking up. "Every day's manageable. That's not what I asked." He glanced at her, surprised, as he sometimes was, by the precision of a 7-year-old's logic. "It might be a complicated day," he said, "but I'll handle it. You focus on Mrs. Brennan's math quiz. I already know the answers. Then you can think about something nice while everyone else panics." She smiled, and the smile did what her smiles always did. It rearranged something in his chest, made the weight of everything else briefly irrelevant. At Hale Corporation, the morning unfolded in the normal rhythm of a mid-sized logistics firm trying to present itself as something larger. The offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building in the financial district, and the lobby had the aggressive cleanliness of a place that wanted you to know it was serious. Ethan badged in at 8:02, nodded to the security desk, and took the stairs because the elevator was always crowded at that hour, and he preferred the 2 minutes of solitude. In the warehouse coordination office on the 4th floor, he settled in and pulled up the inventory reconciliation he had been working on for the past week. The numbers had been bothering him. Not in an obvious way. Whoever had adjusted the figures was careful, methodical, the kind of careful that suggested experience. But Ethan had been running these reports for 4 years, and he had a feel for what normal looked like, and something in the past 6 months was not normal. He had made a note. He had intended to write it up properly and bring it to the compliance department this week. He had been careful precisely because he did not have solid proof, yet only a pattern, a shape in the data that looked wrong. He was still looking at the figures when Sandra appeared in his doorway, her face arranged in the expression she used when she had bad news she didn't want to deliver. "Ethan, you've been summoned." He looked up. "By who?" "Hale herself." Her assistant called down. "Conference room A." Now, he felt something cold move through him. Not quite fear. More like the premonition of something he could not yet name. "Do you know what it's about?" he asked. Sandra's eyes slid away. "I think you should go." Conference room. A was the largest in the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long table that could seat 20. It was used for board presentations and all-hands meetings. Ethan understood. The moment he walked in and saw how many people were already present, not just HR, not just Vanessa Hale and her assistant, but 15 or 20 managers and department heads arranged around the table and standing along the walls, that this was not a private conversation. Vanessa Hale stood at the head of the room. She was 41. Though she carried herself like someone ageless, in the way that serious authority can make a person seem outside ordinary time. Her dark hair was pulled back. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. Her expression, when she looked at Ethan, was not angry so much as finalized the expression of someone who had already completed the thought and was now simply announcing the conclusion. Marcus Thayer stood slightly behind her left shoulder. He was the deputy director of logistics, Ethan's direct supervisor, and a man Ethan had quietly distrusted for the better part of a year, without being able to articulate exactly why. Marcus had the particular gift of seeming very reasonable while saying nothing of substance. He looked at Ethan now with what appeared to be regret, and the performance of that regret was very well executed. "Mr. Calloway," Vanessa said, "we've concluded our internal review of the inventory discrepancy in the third quarter fulfillment reports. A shipment valued at approximately $240,000 is unaccounted for, and the access logs place the relevant authorizations within your credentials." The room was very quiet. Ethan could hear the building's ventilation system. "That's not accurate," he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. Later, when he replayed the moment, he had been afraid, and he had been steady anyway, which he thought was the only real kind of steadiness. "We have documentation," Vanessa continued. "Signed authorizations with your name and employee number, timestamps corresponding to your logged access periods. I would like to see that documentation. You'll have opportunity to review it with HR. However, given the severity of the allegation and the value involved, we cannot permit you to remain on the premises during investigation." She paused. "Your employment is terminated, effective today, pending full review." He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with that practiced, sorrowing expression. "Marcus," Ethan said quietly, "you know this isn't right." Something moved in Marcus's eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but awareness. The awareness of a man who knew precisely what he was doing and had decided the cost was acceptable. Then it was gone, replaced by professional blankness. "Mr. Calloway," Vanessa said, "I understand you may feel this is—" "I've been trying to report a discrepancy for 3 weeks, Ethan said, raising his voice for the first time. "I have emails. I have notes. I flagged this to compliance and to Marcus's office, and I was told it was being reviewed. I have documentation of that too. He looked at her directly. Someone has been running money out of this department for at least 6 months. And it isn't me. The room shifted, almost imperceptibly. A few people looked at Marcus. Vanessa's expression did not change. Those claims will be evaluated during the investigation, she said. By whom? By our compliance department. Marcus oversees compliance. The silence this produced was the loudest sound in the room. Mr. Calloway. Vanessa's voice had taken on a quality like cooled metal. Attempting to deflect responsibility onto a senior colleague is not going to change the documented evidence we have before us. I have seen employees in difficult personal circumstances use those circumstances as, "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Don't bring my daughter into this room." His voice was very quiet now. "Whatever you think of me, leave her out of it." She held his gaze for a moment, and something flickered there, brief as a single frame, something she shut down immediately, and then she nodded to the security officer standing by the door. His keycard was deactivated. His access badge was collected. He was escorted through the lobby, past the reception desk, past Sandra, who stood at the top of the stairwell with her hand over her mouth, past 2 junior analysts who looked away. In the elevator, something shifted in his jacket pocket. He reached in and found the folded note he'd meant to leave in Lily's lunch. In the morning's distraction, he had taken it by mistake. He held it in his palm. "You are the reason I get out of bed," and said nothing. Outside, in the small plaza in front of the building, a lunch bag had been set beside his car. He had not noticed it fall during the escort. Someone had picked it up and left it there. He did not know who. He sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes, without starting the engine, watching the lunch hour crowd move past on the sidewalk. Then his phone buzzed. Mercy General billing. He sent it to voicemail. He drove to a parking lot 3 blocks away and sat there until he trusted his voice. And then he called Lily's school to leave a message for the aftercare coordinator that pickup time would remain the same. Then he called his daughter, because she would be at lunch. Because she would see a missed call from him and worry. Bah. She was laughing at something, a friend's voice in the background. "Hey, Bean, just checking in. How was the math quiz?" "Easy. I told you." "Good. I'll see you at 5:30, okay? We'll make something good for dinner." "Tacos?" "Sure. Tacos." He hung up and sat in the empty parking lot in the beginning of rain. And for a long time he did not move at all. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was the strange thing about financial collapse. It didn't announce itself with a single catastrophic event. It arrived in quiet increments, in small doors, closing one after another. He sent out 43 applications in the first 3 weeks. He heard back from 11. Of the 11, 6 went quiet after the first round of contact, and he understood, from conversations with former colleagues, and from a phone call he wasn't meant to overhear at a mutual acquaintance's event, that Marcus had made calls. Not threatening calls, nothing actionable, simply calls to the right people. The ones who handled references and background considerations, mentioning ongoing investigations and pending review, in the careful language of a man who understood exactly how much damage he could do, without saying anything technically false. The other 5 opportunities dried up for what were described as restructuring reasons or shifting timelines. Ethan added them to his list and kept applying. He picked up 2 temporary positions through an agency. One was data entry for an insurance firm, 2 weeks. One was inventory support at a warehouse in the outer district, which paid $15 less per hour than his old salary and required a 90-minute commute each way. He took both. He sold the watch in the 4th week. It had been his grandfather's, a simple mechanical piece with a scratched crystal, worth more to him than any monetary assessment could account for. He sold it to a jeweler on Maple Avenue for $300 and used the money to fill Lily's prescriptions and pay the overdue portion of the Mercy General account, which reduced the balance but did not clear it. Lily, for her part, did not ask many questions. She was 7, but she was a particular kind of 7, the kind shaped by the experience of a parent who had learned to speak to her honestly within the limits of what a child needed to carry. She knew things were harder than before. She knew they were careful with money. She had stopped asking for things she saw in stores, the way children do when they have absorbed the emotional temperature of their home. One evening, while he was making soup the cheap kind, stretched with extra vegetables, she looked up from her homework and said, "Bah, did you get fired because you did something bad?" He turned from the stove. He crouched to her level, which she was now slightly too old to require, but which he did anyway because it felt important. "I got fired because someone was dishonest, and they put the blame on me," he said. And the person in charge believed the wrong person. She considered this. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. Are you angry?" He thought about it genuinely, the way he always did when she asked him real questions. "I was. Now I'm mostly tired. But we're going to be okay, Bean. I promise you that." "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to make us okay. That's my job. Not the one at the company, that job." He touched her chest lightly, where her heart was. "That one doesn't come with a salary. But I'm very good at it." She laughed the short, surprised laugh she gave when something unexpectedly moved her, and went back to her worksheet. And he went back to the stove and stood there for a moment, with his eyes closed. At Hale Corporation, the numbers continued to tell their story. Vanessa Hale, who had climbed from a junior analyst position to the corner office in 14 years, through a combination of genuine intelligence and the specific ruthlessness required to survive in spaces built to exclude women who refused to be decorative, was not accustomed to being wrong. She had built her reputation on the precision of her decisions. Every dismissal she had ever made, every restructuring she had ordered, every line she had drawn had been defensible. She had held herself to this standard, the way her own mother had held her to the standard of never showing weakness, never backing down, never leaving a gap in your armor that someone could slip a knife through. The inventory discrepancies did not stop after Ethan Callaway was terminated. She noticed this on a Tuesday, reviewing the quarterly projections with her CFO, Priscilla, who had laid the reports on her desk without comment, which was itself a comment. Vanessa looked at the numbers and then looked at them again, and felt something uncomfortable move through her, not quite doubt, but the shape that doubt takes when it is trying to form and cannot yet find the words. She did not say anything to anyone. She pulled the original reports herself, late in the evening after the floor had cleared. She compared them to the previous quarter. The shape of the discrepancy was the same kind of adjustment, the same accounts, the same careful distribution across enough line items to make it diffuse, easy to miss. She sat in her office at 9:30 in the evening, in the dark building, and thought about Ethan Callaway saying someone has been running money out of this department for at least 6 months. She thought about the pause in the room when he said Marcus oversees compliance. She did not call anyone. She locked the reports in her desk and drove home and sat in her car in the garage for a while, which was something she had not done since the weeks after her mother died, when grief had found her at the end of every day and required a private space before she could bring herself inside. She was not grieving now. She was doing something harder. She was beginning to consider the possibility that she had been used. The Maxwell Foundation annual gala was held every November at the Grand Alcott Hotel, a pre-war building with soaring ceilings and the kind of chandeliers that made people feel they had arrived somewhere that mattered. It drew 300 of the city's senior executives, investors, and philanthropists, and it represented the kind of room where a firm handshake in the corridor could generate more business than 6 months of formal pitching. Vanessa attended because she attended every year, and because this year she was in late discussions on a partnership that required the informal groundwork that events like this were designed to provide. She wore a deep navy dress and arrived at 7 with her assistant, Claire, and immediately began working the room with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that this kind of socializing was not socializing at all, but a different form of labor. She did not expect to see Ethan Callaway. He was wearing the white shirt and black trousers of the event catering staff, moving through the room with a tray of appetizers, small rounds of bruschetta, arranged with care. He was near the east wall when she first saw him, pausing to allow a group of guests to pass, and her recognition was so sudden that it stopped her mid-sentence. He saw her at almost the same moment. The distance between them was perhaps 20 feet, and in that distance passed something unspoken. Not forgiveness, not accusation, simply the raw fact of two people standing in the same room, with the specific weight of what had happened between them. He looked away first, continuing his circuit. She turned back to her conversation, and if she was less present in it for the next several minutes, no one noticed. Marcus was there too. She had expected this. He had always attended the gala, and had always navigated it with smooth charm. The kind of charm that felt like quality at first, and only revealed its cheapness over time, like furniture that looks solid until you try to move it. She watched him approach Ethan at one point, near a pillar at the room's edge, and she was too far away to hear what was said, but she saw Ethan's shoulders straighten, and she saw Marcus smile, the particular smile he used when he felt safe. She was crossing the room not toward them, toward the partnership discussion she needed to have, when Marcus said something loudly enough that a cluster of nearby guests turned to look. She heard, "Catering career suits you better, doesn't it?" Calloway, and the laughter that followed it. The kind that requires witnesses to feel powerful. She stopped walking. She could have kept going. The room was full of conversations that required her. The partnership needed tending. There was no practical reason to pause. She paused anyway, watching Ethan's face in profile. He did not respond to Marcus. He did not smile, or flinch, or make any visible accommodation to the humiliation being offered to him. He simply waited until the moment had consumed itself, and then continued moving. And there was something in the completeness of his composure, the dignity of a man who had decided that other people's cruelty was not worth the energy of reaction that was unexpectedly affecting. She continued across the room. She sat through 20 minutes of partnership discussion and said the right things, and then she stood to make her way to the evening's brief address. The podium was at the north end of the room, elevated slightly on a low platform. She had given these speeches many times, clear, efficient, appropriately warm without being personal, designed to hit the notes that a room of this type needed to hear. She had prepared remarks. She began them. She was 3 sentences in when it happened. A server had placed a small plate of hors d'oeuvres on the podium side table. And she had, in the automatic way of someone whose body acts independently of their public presentation, taken a small piece, a firm cube of something, cheese perhaps, wrapped in something denser, and put it in her mouth. She swallowed too quickly. The conversation she was already engaged in with the microphone allowed no pause, and the piece went wrong, and then there was no air. The experience of choking is not what most people imagine from the outside. It is not pain. Not immediately. It is the sudden and absolute absence of something so ordinary that its absence is almost surreal, like walking into a room and finding gravity has changed. She reached for the podium with both hands. The speech stopped. She heard someone nearby make a startled sound, and the room's noise changed, the way a crowd's sound changes when it realizes something has gone wrong. She could not call out. There was nothing to call with. From a distance that she later could not accurately reconstruct, she thought he had been near the east wall, but the details became uncertain in memory. Ethan Calloway put down his tray. He reached her in what witnesses later described as seconds, though time behaves strangely in moments of emergency, and no one could agree on the exact duration. He moved through the crowd, the way someone moves when they have already made the decision, and the body is simply executing it. Not running, exactly, but with a directness that parted the frozen onlookers by sheer momentum. He came around behind her. His hands found her waist. "I'm going to help you," he said, close to her ear. It was the kind of statement that contained both information and permission, and he delivered it with such steadiness that it penetrated even the roaring panic in her chest. She felt her hands let go of the podium. He performed the maneuver with the competence of someone who had learned it properly. He had taken a first aid certification course when Lily's condition was first diagnosed, because he had understood that his daughter's life might require him to know things he had never needed to know before. The thrust was firm and well positioned, and at the second attempt, the piece dislodged, and the air came back, and with it came the involuntary violence of her body reclaiming what it had almost lost. She coughed until her eyes watered. He did not step away immediately. One hand remained at her shoulder, steadying, not possessive, simply present. When she finally straightened and turned, they were face to face. She was crying, which was not something she did in public, which had not happened to her in front of an audience in decades. The crying was involuntary, the result of the physiological shock rather than any emotional decision. But it felt, in that moment, like the most exposed she had been in years. He looked at her. His expression was not triumph. It was not satisfaction or vindication. It was the plain, clear look of a man who had done what the moment required and was waiting to see what would happen next. "You're all right," he said. It was not a question. She nodded, once, still catching her breath. Behind them, the room began to process what it had witnessed. She heard Claire's voice and a security officer's radio, and the particular excited murmur of a crowd that had just observed something that would become a story. She was aware, at the margin of her attention, that several devices had recorded the event, that it would be documented, that tomorrow it would be something people discussed. She was not thinking about any of that. She was looking at Ethan Callaway. "Why did you?" she began, and stopped. "The same reason anyone would," he said simply. This answer was, she would think later, the one that stayed with her. Not a speech about character or forgiveness, or the opportunity to demonstrate virtue. Just the same reason anyone would. As if saving her had not required him to overcome anything. As if the history between them had simply not been a factor he considered. She did not know then that it had cost him something. That on his way across the room he had for one clear second thought about Lily and the bills and the watch, and that he had decided anyway. The deciding had been nearly instantaneous, which was perhaps the truest thing about him. Marcus Thayer left the gala within the next 10 minutes. 2 different guests noticed him leaving. Neither thought to say anything until later. The video that circulated was remarkable not only for what it showed but for what preceded it. Approximately 20 seconds of footage, captured at an angle that included the podium and the crowd's edge, showed Ethan's movement through the room, the deliberateness, the tray set down, the immediate path toward her. It showed everything she knew already. But seeing it from the outside, compressed into 20 seconds, produced in her an effect she had not anticipated. She watched it alone, in her office at midnight, and did not watch it again. The following morning, she called her personal compliance contact, not the company's internal department, a woman named Dr. Renata Huff, whom she had worked with years earlier at a previous firm, and trusted above most people in her professional life. She asked Renata to conduct a private, independent review of the third-quarter inventory records without routing anything through Marcus Thayer's division. Renata called back in 4 days. The results were the kind of findings that make a careful person very still for a very long time. The authorization signatures had been replicated, a sophisticated forgery, but a forgery nonetheless, which required access to both the electronic signature protocols and the internal timestamp system. Marcus Thayer had that access. Ethan Callaway had had it too, which was why the forgery was credible. But the pattern of which files were altered, which weren't, and the specific accounts involved pointed unmistakably in a different direction when you looked at who benefited downstream. Additionally, Renata had found a series of internal memos, routed through a subsidiary system rather than the main server, that documented Ethan's attempts to flag the discrepancy. 3 emails to the compliance inbox. 2 requests for meetings. All of them time-stamped in the weeks before the termination. None of them acknowledged. Then, unexpectedly, there was a message in her own inbox from an address she didn't recognize. No name attached, just an encrypted folder containing 4 years of financial data and a series of transfers to an account in Marcus Thayer's wife's maiden name. She did not know who sent it. She thought she might know eventually. She filed it alongside Renata's report and called her attorney. For 2 days, she sat with this information privately, not because she was unsure of what it meant, but because she was in the process of understanding something about herself that was uncomfortable in a way that professional setbacks never were. She had built a career on being right. She had justified a great deal of sharpness and a great deal of cold decision-making on the basis that she was right, that her judgment was sound, that the price of being decisive was occasionally worth the cost to other people, because the decisions were correct. This one had not been. She had been shown manufactured evidence by someone she trusted, because she had never questioned whether the people she promoted deserved her trust. Only whether they were effective. She had not listened to Ethan's objection, because she had categorized it as deflection. She had let the termination be public, because she believed in visible accountability, and had not stopped to verify whether the person being made an example of was actually guilty. She had been used as a weapon against an innocent person. She had used herself as a weapon against an innocent person. On the third evening, she asked Claire for Ethan Calloway's address from the HR files she had closed access to after the termination. Claire provided it without asking questions. This was one of the things Vanessa valued most about her. His apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in the north part of the district, a neighborhood that was not quite run down, but had the specific character of a place where people made things work, rather than made things comfortable. The elevator was working. There were crayon drawings taped to the inside wall of the hallway near his door, which she recognized as children's artwork from a school, probably posted by a neighbor. She stood in front of his door for longer than she intended. She knocked. He opened the door and looked at her with the face of someone who had already prepared for this visit in the abstract, and was still not fully ready for the reality of it. He was wearing a gray, long-sleeved shirt, and there were shadows under his eyes that had the settled quality of many consecutive late nights, rather than any single bad one. Behind him, she could see the apartment small, clean, a child's drawing on the refrigerator, a medication schedule pinned to the corkboard near the counter. "Miss Hale," he said, "may I come in?" He considered this for a moment, and she understood that she had no right to expect the door to open, that she was asking a favor from someone who owed her nothing. He stepped back. The apartment had the careful organization of a space that was doing more with less. A fold-out table served as a desk. There was one armchair and a small couch. On the couch, a child was asleep under a yellow blanket, her breathing faintly audible. The slight rasp Ethan had learned to hear so precisely that he could gauge her condition from across a room. Vanessa looked at the child for a moment. "Is she? She's okay tonight. She had a harder afternoon." He moved toward the kitchen. "Do you want water?" "No. Thank you." She stood near the door, which felt right. "I came because there are things I need to say, and I thought doing it in person was the only way that counted." He turned and leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. Not defensively, but with the posture of a man who had been carrying his own weight for long enough that it had become his resting position. "I was wrong," she said. "Not in a procedural sense, not in the sense of operating on incomplete information. I was wrong in the way that a person is wrong, when they have the opportunity to be more careful and choose not to be. Because being careful would mean being slower, and I've built my whole professional identity on not being slow." The room was very quiet. On the couch, Lily shifted slightly, sighed, settled. "I should have verified the evidence before acting on it," Vanessa continued. "I should have given you the opportunity to present your case properly. I should have listened when you named Marcus in that room, because whatever I thought of how you said it, the substance of what you said deserved more than dismissal." She paused. "I am sorry. I mean that without qualification." Ethan was quiet for long enough that she could not read it. "A person can be sorry," he said finally, "and have done damage that the sorry doesn't reach. Yes, my daughter asked me if I got fired for doing something wrong." He said it without drama. Just the fact of it, laid down like an object on a table. "She's 7. She shouldn't be carrying that. The worry of it. Whether her father is the kind of man people fire for stealing." Vanessa felt the sentence land in her chest and stay there. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "I told her the truth. That someone was dishonest, and the blame landed on me." He looked at her. "I try to tell her the truth, even when it's hard. I think children deserve that." She nodded slowly. She opened her mouth to speak and found, briefly, that she didn't have the words she'd prepared, that they had dissolved into something more honest and less polished. "I grew up in a house where being wrong was the same as being weak," she said. This was not something she said to people. She was not entirely sure why she was saying it now, except that the apartment and the sleeping child and the specific quality of his attention made performance feel impossible. I learned to decide quickly and defend those decisions entirely, because any ambivalence was something that could be used against you. I'm not offering that as an explanation that excuses anything. I know. From the couch came a soft sound, and they both turned. Lily was awake, or nearly. She was in that half state, eyes open but not fully focused, looking around the apartment with the mild puzzlement of someone who has surfaced from sleep to find the world slightly rearranged. "Bah," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "I'm here," he said, moving toward her. He sat on the edge of the couch and tucked the blanket corner back in, and she blinked and focused and saw Vanessa standing near the door. "Who's that?" Lily asked. "Someone I know from work," Ethan said. Lily considered this. She looked at Vanessa with the frank, unfiltered assessment that children permit themselves. And Vanessa felt, very distinctly, being seen. "You look sad," Lily said. Vanessa did not know what to do with this. She said, "I'm working on it." Lily nodded, as if this were a satisfactory answer. "She seems okay," the girl said to her father. "Not like bad." Ethan looked at his daughter, and something in his face, not quite amusement, not quite tenderness, some third thing that mixed both registered for just a moment before he smoothed it over. "Try to sleep a little more," he said to her. "It's late." Lily pulled the blanket up, untroubled, and closed her eyes with the absolute confidence of a child who knows she is safe. Within a minute, she was breathing steadily again. Ethan walked Vanessa to the door. "You said what you came to say," he said. "I heard it. That's all I can ask," she said. And then, "The investigation is proceeding. Marcus will not be in a position to harm you further." He nodded. "Good." She left. In the hallway, under the crayon drawings, she stood for a moment before the elevator came, and what she felt was something for which she did not have a precise word, not relief, not resolved, but something that had perhaps been waiting a long time to begin. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa moved with the methodical precision she normally brought to business strategy, except now she brought it to something personal, in a way it had not been before. She worked with Renata and the company's external legal counsel, carefully documenting each point in the chain of evidence. The encrypted folder she had received anonymously proved to be foundational. She never learned who sent it, though she had her suspicions, and she chose not to pursue the question too vigorously. Marcus, who had watched the trajectory of events from his position and had begun to feel the ground shift beneath him, made two errors. The first was attempting to have 3 critical files in the subsidiary system quietly deleted, which was logged, which created evidence of the attempt. The second was calling 2 members of the board to suggest, in the careful language he had always used, that Vanessa herself had signed off on the original scheme and was now attempting to redirect blame. He had underestimated how long she had been in these rooms, and how clearly the board understood the difference between someone protecting the company and someone protecting themselves. There was a full board meeting on a gray Tuesday morning, the second week of December, the windows fogged with cold. Vanessa had prepared the presentation herself, which she had not done for any board meeting in 3 years. She walked through the evidence without editorializing, letting the documentation build its own argument. And when she was finished, she said, "The person who was terminated in October had been attempting to report these discrepancies for weeks before we took action against him. That action was based on falsified evidence that I did not verify adequately. That is a failure of my judgment, and I take responsibility for it." Marcus, who was present because she had deliberately not informed him of the meeting's nature, made his attempt to redirect. It lasted 4 minutes before 3 board members with better institutional memory than he'd accounted for began asking questions he could not answer cleanly. The meeting ended with a call to the company's legal team. Marcus Thayer's keycard was deactivated before noon. By 2 o'clock, the appropriate regulatory authorities had been notified. That afternoon, Vanessa called Ethan. "It's done," she said. On the other end, there was a brief silence. "Thank you for telling me. The board has agreed to a formal public statement acknowledging that the original termination was based on fabricated evidence. Your record will be cleared. And she paused briefly, there is a formal offer of reinstatement, if you want it. With a significant adjustment to the title and compensation. Another silence, longer this time. No, he said. But thank you. She had expected this. She did not argue. The formal public acknowledgement happened on a Thursday, a carefully worded statement that was distributed to the building staff before it went to the press. Vanessa had written it herself and had not softened it into corporate language. It said, plainly, that Ethan Callaway's termination had been based on fabricated evidence, that he bore no responsibility for the financial discrepancies, and that the company regretted the harm caused. That afternoon, Sandra from Accounts Payable, who had stood at the top of the stairwell with her hand over her mouth on the morning everything happened, sent him a voicemail that lasted 3 minutes and ended with crying. He called her back. They talked for an hour. He did not return to Hale Corporation. He had thought carefully about the offer, not because he was tempted, but because he believed any significant decision deserved proper thought rather than the satisfaction of refusing quickly. But the work he had begun to sketch out in the evenings, at the fold-out table after Lily was asleep, had started to feel real in a way that surprised him. He had spent 4 years learning a specific industry from the inside. He understood its inefficiencies. He understood where smaller operators lost money and why. He had begun to draft something, not a full business plan yet, but the outline of one. What he did not know was that Vanessa had already called her own attorney and placed $50,000 in a structured investment vehicle with a third-party administrator, designated for a small logistics startup she had reason to believe would be founded in the new year. She had instructed the administrator to conduct a normal due diligence process, and not to mention her name. This had taken her 40 minutes. She had done it, and not thought about it again. She had also, through a different channel, arranged with Mercy General's Patient Services Office to restructure Lily's account under a charitable care program that the hospital maintained for qualifying cases, which reduced the outstanding balance by 80%. She had not told Ethan about this. She told herself she had not told him because it was easier to do quietly than to navigate his refusal of charity. This was partially true. The other part was that she was not yet sure she knew how to give things without it feeling like a transaction, and she did not want to practice that uncertainty on someone who had already been damaged enough by her miscalculations. In the first week of January, Ethan brought Lily to her regular appointment at Mercy General. At the check-in desk, the administrator looked at the file and mentioned, in the routine way of someone relaying information rather than explaining it, that the account had been substantially restructured under charitable care. Ethan looked at the administrator for a moment. When did that happen? The administrator checked the date. December 14th. He thanked her and took Lily to the waiting room and sat with her while she flipped through a magazine about animals, pointing out the ones she recognized, reading aloud the captions she could manage. He did not call Vanessa that day. He sat with the information for 3 days. The way he sat with most significant things. On the 4th day, he sent her a text message. I know. Thank you. She did not respond for 6 hours, which was unlike her. When she did, it said, she should have the care she needs, that's all. He read it twice and put his phone down and went back to the business plan. November again. The city had that particular November quality, cold enough to keep the windows shut, but the afternoons were sometimes still lit with the thin gold light that makes everything look both present and a little elegiac, like a photograph taken at the exact right moment. Callaway Logistics Solutions had been operating for 9 months. It was small, 3 employees, a network of regional partnerships. Ethan had spent the spring building one conversation at a time. The investors, including the anonymous third party, whose identity he had by now correctly surmised, had given him enough runway to build carefully rather than desperately. He was building carefully. Lily was 8.5 now. Her respiratory function had improved to the point where her pulmonologist had reduced the monitoring schedule from monthly to quarterly. She had started a book club at school, which consisted of herself and 2 friends reading the same book and then arguing about it with great seriousness, and she reported these arguments to Ethan each evening as though they were dispatches from an important conference. She had also, over the course of the year, developed a comfortable familiarity with Vanessa, in the way that children develop familiarity with adults who appear consistently in their environment and prove themselves reliable. Vanessa had not sought this deliberately. She had simply been present on a handful of occasions, dropping by the new small office to review something, crossing paths at the hospital once, appearing for a brief visit when Lily was home with a cold and Ethan needed to take a call. Children have their own calculus for deciding who is trustworthy, and Lily had run hers and arrived at a verdict. The Maxwell Foundation Gala was held again on a Friday in mid-November, 1 year since the night that had rearranged several lives simultaneously. Vanessa attended because she always did. This year, before the program began, she found a seat at a corner table and pulled out her phone and sent a message to Ethan. 12 months. Strange to mark. He replied 7 minutes later. Strange, but worth marking. At the formal portion of the evening, the Foundation's chair introduced Vanessa as one of the event's featured speakers, which was not new. She had spoken here before. What was new was the subject of her remarks. She had written them herself, late at night, at her desk at home rather than at the office. She had written several drafts. The final version was shorter than she expected it to be. She said, among other things, "I want to speak about a kind of failure that doesn't appear on financial reports. The failure to extend to another person the same standard of proof you would demand of any other important decision. The failure to listen when listening was uncomfortable. I made this kind of failure last year, in this room, and I caused real harm because of it. The person who suffered that harm was also, as it happened, the person who saved my life in this room on this same evening 1 year ago. I've thought about what it means that he did that. Not the mechanics of it, but what it says about a person who has reason not to act and acts anyway. I'm not sure I've reached a conclusion, but I think that kind of person, someone who does the right thing not because the calculus is favorable, but because it simply is the right thing, is the standard the rest of us should be working harder to meet." She paused. "I'm working harder to meet it," she said. "That's all." The room applauded. She stepped back from the podium and found that her hands were steady, which surprised her a little. The speeches about efficiency and strategy never made her hands unsteady. But this one had, right up until the moment she began. Later, walking out through the lobby, she passed the place near the east wall, where she had seen him standing last year with his tray. The room was the same room, the chandeliers the same, the crowd's texture similar. But the way she moved through it was different, in a way that was not visible and possibly never would be to anyone watching. But that was completely real. 3 days after the gala, on a Sunday afternoon, with low winter light coming through the windows of the Calloway apartment, which had been expanded to a 2-bedroom since spring, Lily sat at the kitchen table working on a project about ecosystems. She had paper and colored pencils spread across the surface and was drawing a food chain with the focused authority of someone who has decided they understand the subject completely. Vanessa was there, which had become a not unusual Sunday occurrence, reviewing some documents at one end of the table while Lily worked at the other. Ethan was making coffee and listening to the radio at a volume low enough not to intrude. "Vanessa," Lily said, without looking up from her drawing, "Do sharks have feelings?" Vanessa set down her papers. She considered the question with the seriousness it had been offered. "That's genuinely debated," she said. "Scientists think they have something like emotional states, stress responses, comfort-seeking behavior. Whether that constitutes feelings the way you and I experience feelings, we don't know for certain." Lily processed this. "I think they probably do," she said, "and they're just not very good at showing them." Ethan set a mug on the table near Vanessa without comment and went back to the counter. She looked at the mug and then at him, and he was already looking somewhere else. Out the window at the Sunday city, the light thin and clear and golden in the particular way of November. She held the mug in both hands. Lily was drawing again, the pencil moving with conviction across the paper. A shark in the middle of a careful food chain, surrounded by arrows pointing in every direction. Outside, the city made its ordinary Sunday sounds. Inside, the coffee was warm, and the room was quiet. And there was nothing happening that would look significant from the outside. And Vanessa understood, sitting there, that this, the ordinariness of it, the ease of it, the way it asked nothing of her, except presence, was something she had not known she was missing until she had begun, slowly, imperfectly, to find her way toward it. Ethan looked back from the window. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across a kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. It was the kind of moment that doesn't require anything to be said. Sometimes the most important things are not the dramatic ones, not the choking, not the termination, not the boardroom and the confrontation and the legal proceedings. Sometimes they are a mug set down without comment, and a child drawing a shark with great confidence. And two people who have not yet found all the words but who have found, carefully and against considerable odds, the beginning of a way to trust each other. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough.